Hi, I'm Will.
And I'm Luke.
And this is Will and Luke Discuss,
a vodcast
and podcast
where we discuss content related to psychology,
personal growth,
self-development,
and well-being. This episode, we're discussing
The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking by Oliver Burkeman. Another Oliver Burkeman book there. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, good, thanks. In the new place. In Melbourne, in the new Will and Luke Discuss headquarters office, Melbourne location. Yeah. Feeling good. Kind of in like a new space. Feels really intentional. Feels really targeted to what I want to do. Kind of got my dual screens set up. Got like my bookshelf. I guess like think about some of the books we've read and setting up environments to do deep work and to spend time doing the things that are most meaningful to me.
Your snowball mic's in view as well, which is nice.
It's nice, isn't it? It lets people know I'm taking it seriously. But no, it's nice. It's nice just to sort of have an environment that's conducive to doing kind of deep work and a deep discussion. I feel like comfortable and prepared and settled in this environment. So if that answers how I'm doing.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah, it's nice. I guess kind of looking at your whole mic setup and because of your work and stuff, you've got to be pretty slick with your setup, and there's no room for interruptions or anything like that. So it's very intentional, isn't it?
You got to do something with a sound technology degree, haven't you? At least buy a microphone.
That's right. I was thinking just before we started, just to briefly, before we kind of outline what this book is about, just kind of why I sort of felt like doing another Oliver Burkeman book. And I feel I left his last book I feel very relaxed after reading his content. So I feel equally sort of like, what's the way to describe it? Not to take life too seriously, but also able to prioritize what I feel is most valuable in my life. And I feel the exact same way after reading this book. And I think he's just got a really nice way of describing the content, communicating his ideas. It's a nice, comfortable, easy read with quite a lot of depth to it as well. And it's really well researched. And before we were starting, we were saying, kind of it's interesting listening and reading books by journalists as opposed to kind of scientists or philosophers and that sort of thing. So it's certainly makes for a very readable read, and I got a lot from it, and I really enjoy his content. I'd highly recommend people go and check out his stuff. Yeah.
Well, it's what you're saying there sounds like you're coming out not just with information, but with an experience, and like you feel differently from reading. Yeah. And definitely noticing the difference between journalists and academics and how they write and how fun and easy it is to consume. It doesn't necessarily mean that the academics' works are more complicated in terms of the content, but it's certainly harder to pass through sometimes in general. Not to stereotype all academics and all journalists. Right. So what's this book about then?
Let's get stuck into it. Yeah. So I guess the main gist of it, could be in the title, happiness for people who can't stand positive thinking, is that he's outlining that are common ways of trying to become happy through the method of positive thinking, optimism, do not work for us, and we are better off trying an alternative way, which is a more negative approach to happiness. And he starts off the book by describing his experience at a Get Motivated seminar, where there was just this absolute barrage and avalanche of positivity crushing down on him, and he just didn't really get it and didn't really enjoy it, and kind of felt the need to explore further into why this sort of positivity doesn't work. And the subsequent chapters go through other ways which have slightly more negative approaches to happiness. I think maybe just a way just to tie off this introduction from my end is just to kind of quote a couple sentences from the first chapter. So he says, "The effort to try and feel happy is often precisely the thing that makes us miserable. And that it is our constant efforts to eliminate the negative, so insecurity, uncertainty, failure, or sadness, that is what causes us to feel so insecure, anxious, uncertain, and unhappy." He says that happiness often arises through negativity. So don't block out negative thinking or chase positive feelings. That kind of summarizes his initial concepts there. Yeah.
I like how much Alan Watts he quotes throughout this book.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? Yeah.
So yeah, nice one. So Oliver Burkeman, he wrote this column, right, in one of the main newspapers, I forget which, on like self-help and life hacks. And so he sort of surveyed the whole self-help literature. And from the intro, I get that he's saying that there's a whole field in the self-help field, which is like, as you point out, really focused on pumping yourself up, being positive at all costs, not letting like failure be an option. An approach to self-esteem as like positive affirmations in the mirror. This is a whole sort of section of self-help which is focused on that, which I think we can all relate to. I think sort of the Tony Robbins stuff stands out as perhaps a cliche of that whole section. And his point, I suppose, throughout the book is that there can actually be negatives to that perspective on like not allowing negativity into your life, on having to feel positive at all costs, on like even on goal setting and positive visualizations and this sort of stuff. And yeah, like you say, the rest of the chapters are on alternative ways of being, I suppose. I definitely, the book grew on me as it moved, because initially he set up this thing like self-help fields like this, and then it made it sound like what he had was this special answer to this positive thinking attitude. But when he but then the next chapter's on stoicism, and then Buddhism and meditation, and then like transcending the self. And I suppose I was thinking, well, this is all very popular as well. It's not like this is secret in the self-help world. And then I reminded myself that this book was written 10 years ago. So maybe this stuff's caught on a bit more since then.
Yes. It's almost kind of like each chapter has its own book in itself. And I'm sure we've actually probably covered quite a lot of some of the ideas through different people, but it's really nice to kind of have it all tied together. And I think it's also, and literally to quote the title, it is an antidote. And it's got me really thinking about kind of, having done 30 odd podcasts with you, like we've kind of been going through sometimes without this in mind, that we are potentially those people who are kind of charging through the self-help literature, looking for ways to kind of refine ourselves and looking for ways to kind of improve and set goals and targets and achieve. And it's a useful read to kind of slow us down, I guess, in that pursuit, so we don't kind of do another 50 podcasts without considering that there might be an alternative way.
Well, it's noticing where the strategies you use to either feel more productive or more, I don't know, happier, actually have you feeling worse. Noticing when that happens. Yeah.
And what are some of the ways that stood out to you that it makes us feel worse?
Well, I think it's about, well, for me, it's about where these motivations are coming from. And so there's a whole chapter, wasn't there, about the ego and stuff. But like, if you feel you're not good enough in some way, and therefore you need to be more productive or whatever, then like, yes, you can pick up great strategies on time management and productivity and goal setting. But like, ultimately, if the fuel for that is coming from a place of, I don't know, attachment to ego or low self-worth, then like that's never going to be resolved. Or if it is, it's only going to be in small doses, like putting plasters on things. So it's about sort of digging beneath, well, why do I care about, I don't know, making this project, or why do I care about being more productive or earning X amount of money, or whatever we use these self-help books for, and like questioning the fuel beneath that. And I think this book, aims to do just that.
I think kind of to share my my learning, as I guess, from this is that or the thing that stood out most is that attachment to things sort of being a certain way, and how that can lead to over planning and this sort of, this attachment to the idea that things in the future will be better if I plan towards them and if things are a certain way, and then being so fixated on that when they don't go that way, then you feel this level of disappointment. And I guess to go further into that, what he says is, he says it's about non-attachment, like clinging on to things or pushing things away. And he says pain comes from holding on too tightly, or when we lose them, we become unhappy. He says, we should be able to feel life without become stuck in what should be. He says, learn to stop trying to fix things, change or control things, turn negative into happy thoughts, stop running away, relax into the groundlessness of the situation. Which that certainly stood out to me. And I think it's important because I think what often we are trying to do when we're, putting goals in place, or we're trying to put in certain systems, is that we're kind of trying to assure ourselves for a certain kind of future. We're trying to make sure that in the future things are going to be some way. And to a degree, we are creating, a better chance for that. Whether it's through exercise, I'm less likely to become unwell through certain illnesses, but also to another side of it is that life is unpredictable and life doesn't go a certain way. And there's a lot more happiness to be found in the uncertainty of things and the insecurity of things, which is one of his chapters. It's not even a chapter, the epilogue, so the last bit of the book he calls negative capability. And that was that stood out to me because that was one of the, way back when we read Search for the Secure Base, that book on attachment theory. Negative capability was one of the sort of markers of secure attachment. And I don't think I completely understand what it meant when I read that book, but reading this, it was much clearer. He's talking about when things are uncertain, or you don't know an answer, or you have, things are uncomfortable because you don't know, things aren't in place and things are unstable. It's like learning to, or being sort of all right with that, not being so anxious that things have to go a certain way, or that things must be resolved, that you can sort of swim and sit in the discomfort of things not being resolved or not knowing the answer right now. So I enjoyed that. It's great. It's great book. I know it's great. We're kind of going straight to the last chapter, but it's certainly, I like the but he talks about, not kind of constantly trying to find solutions or spending all this time seeking closure. It's more about, kind of embracing imperfection. And he says, he says a willingness to adopt an oblique stance to one's inner life, to stand back, to face what others flee, and understand that shortcuts to positive moods aren't going to produce profound happiness. So I think what he's often saying, that a lot of these positive self-talk and these affirmations and all these ways of sort of pumping ourselves up don't actually serve us for happiness in the long run. They can sort of give us a false sense of happiness, or kind of, brush over the situation we're going through, but actually they're not going to profoundly make us happy. And it shies away from reality of the situation if we're too optimistic. And I think that's probably what he kind of identifies with, particularly being, kind of a British grumpy journalist. He kind of just doesn't like this over optimism. It's not authentic. It's not real. It's not based in reality. It's something to kind of celebrate that things don't quite work out sometimes, and there's opportunities that come from that.
He sort of joked about, like, if you're one of these pump up motivational speakers, and I keep having Tony Robbins in mind when he talks about these types, because he's just like the archetype for it. He was saying, cool, wouldn't it be really difficult to feel like you just could never show frustration or like be in a bad mood or be cynical about something, because like you'd just be called out on it and you feel like you'd have to maintain this persona. Whereas with this approach, it's like, if you're pissed off, you can sort of own that and authentically be with it, and it doesn't go against your philosophy of life, which feels a much more relaxed way to be.
I think he's saying that, like, that as your aim to always be positive and always pump up, like reduces your chance of it actually happening. happening. And he talks about, kind of like the law of reversed effort. And I think that's something I can probably identify with. And he does say this is something that's hard to describe in words, but often we find in life that when we're kind of, not kind of holding too tightly to certain outcomes and kind of going with the flow, kind of going, he says, kind of dancing through life without a particular outcome in mind.
Yeah.
You're sort of kind of like tussling with it, and you're a bit of back and forth, and you're, contending, and you are kind of, making some work towards, kind of valued areas of your life, but not with a set outcome in mind that you get so attached to it. I think that is when life appears to be a bit more enjoyable, I suppose. And I guess it gets you thinking about the times in life when the biggest opportunities that have come your way are often ones that you didn't plan for, you didn't put in place. Kind of like that job offer that came up. I know, like, I got into a grad program by just meeting someone in a bar who worked on the same grad program I was 3 days before the applications closed. I didn't plan for that. I didn't, I guess that's one example of thousands that happen. I think that
just shows that the secret works, mate.
The secret works. Oh yeah, manifesting. yeah. He's really critical of the secret, isn't he? And, I think I don't know kind of what your personal stance is, and I'm presuming you're not really into this whole pump up, talk up stuff, but we have spoken about doing incantations, and there is a chapter about positive visualization. So I'm wondering what your personal opinion is of overly pumped up techniques versus some of the Tony Robbins daily incantations that you've previously practiced. I don't know if you practice them anymore. Your daily intention setting, what's the crossover?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So I mean, I definitely, when we, I try everything that we read about before we do a podcast on it. So I've definitely tried I remember with the Tony Robbins stuff, I lots of it I found really helpful. So I don't want to sort of come across as if it's all
of course,
bad. But he has you kind of mark out areas of life to think about, how each one's going and what goals you might want for each area. And I remember him suggesting to really write the most sort of enthusiastic. So rather than the health, you might write athletic, godlike body, or you'd
fitness warrior.
You'd have you use adjectives to make it, as motivating as possible. And I found that they sort of, I went along with it, and I found it just sort of tailed off quite quickly, any sort of enthusiasm I had for it. And I forgot what they meant. I just crossed them out and wrote health and finances. And I actually sat into that. And in the long run, it just feels it suits me better. I don't know how much of an answer that is to your question. Some of the incantation stuff in his program, it was fine. You're running along and you have someone in your ear going every day and every way, I'm getting better and better. And it sort of wakes you up, I suppose. I do, like you said, I do still look at intentions. That's less about that's more about, I suppose, values I aim to remind myself of. I sort of meditate on, but I know I failed at them all the time, which is probably why I wrote them down as reminders. I don't know, I might be kidding myself, but in my head they feel different than motivational pump ups.
I think that there probably is a distinction there, isn't there, that having something that's values you want to live by and reminders in certain situations that come up throughout the day. It's I endeavor to act this way given this stimulus. But I guess that's very different from sort of some of the more cheesy pump up stuff that's kind of what does I feel like we keep going back to Tony Robbins. So I guess the same as you, I want to acknowledge that I've really enjoyed a lot of his content, but there's somebody saying if you have the right emotion, you'll get the right outcome. I think that was one of his quotes. Okay. Something like that, where it's if you can force yourself to feel a certain way, what you want will happen. And I think that's sort of kind of counter to what he's saying here, this negative approach to happiness, which is embrace the more negative sides of life, whether that's through some of the more stoic strategies like the end of day meditation or confronting the worst case scenario will actually motivate you more to do the things that you value. Kind of similar to the concept of 4,000 weeks, where he's saying, sort of like, in knowing that your life is finite, that should force you to spend it more wisely. There's one thing, I guess, like linking to death a bit. There's that chapter, chapter 8, death as a way of life. Memento mori, but actually never really got to understand what that meant. But I guess he's I thought this might be a chapter you'd enjoy, so I might just kind of tell you my main takeaway from that one and see what you think. But I think he's talking about cultures that celebrate death a lot more. So it's obviously like the Day of the Dead, and then in Filipino culture as well, and Mexican culture, like they don't repress death. And what he's saying is that they, by celebrating and having death reminders, so whether that's kind of like a skull at your desk or that new poster I bought that's the weeks of your life, like having daily death reminders is a way so we let death seep back into life, and we can live life and death in companion. But the bit I like to is, so we live more meaningfully because we are reminded of death, and that will give us less anxiety, that at the end of life we wouldn't have lived a life that we would regret. So by keeping death in mind, we live life more fully. So therefore we become less scared of death, because when it comes to the time we're dying, we've lived more fully up until that point. Right. Does that make sense? Did you follow that?
Yeah. So that if we were to remind ourselves of death and therefore live, I don't know, more meaningfully, or at least with death in mind, then when death comes, we won't regret as much, so we won't be as scared of losing life.
And it says, there's a quote, death can only take the life of a dead man. So it doesn't take your worries, it doesn't take your anxiety, like live life so fully that death doesn't take along your anxieties, regrets and worries. I mean, that's
to play devil's advocate on this, I could imagine reading that and coming away with like, oh crap, I really need to make the most of life before like it's too late. Like I better set my goals and set my intentions and like put myself up to make sure I like achieve because death's going to come soon, and I need to get as much done as I possibly can.
I think he's probably what this is kind of a warning to kind of the complete denial of it. Like we live as if it doesn't exist. And he says, we have a physical self and a symbolic one.
Yeah.
But often we kind of forget that we are going to. I think this is something I've kind of struggled to find my own definition of it. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest questions you could ever really be asking and talking about is death. But I guess just trying to find my own philosophy around it and kind of sort of understand like the level of fear it carries for me, and am I acknowledging it enough in a day-to-day sense, or am I teeing myself up for a life that when I'm 80 I'm going to look back and regret? I mean, look, those two sentences, I don't know quite what to do with them, but there we go. Yeah.
Well, there is definitely something in there of, on the one hand, he's pointing out the perhaps the most common attitude across a lot of cultures, particularly the British culture, I'd say, is this avoidance of death, this discomfort with death, this avoidance of people who are grieving or who are dying. So on the one hand, if it's a fact of life, which it is, then surely living in line with it, living in line with truth is going to lead to a more fruitful existence. But I can certainly see the flip side, that it could be the thing that scares us into trying to be as productive as possible with the time we have left, which obviously isn't what he's saying here, but I'm just fantasizing how someone could read that.
Yeah, what's the sweet spot like? Think about death once a week or once a month. You can't obviously think about it every day, staring you in the face. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's kind of like, at what point does that become frightening as opposed to motivating? Yeah. I wonder what your thoughts were on the chapter on goals.
I was going to move us to goals. I'm glad you did.
Sure, maybe you make a start. I feel like I've been.
Well, I found it really interesting
because
I suppose with some of his points, I think I enjoyed them, but had already considered them, like going through chapters on, for example, chapter 2 was on Stoicism, like, which I enjoyed, but was very familiar. Same with like meditation was the next chapter in Buddhism, which again, I enjoy, very familiar. But then, then the next chapter was on goals, and goals is something we've obviously looked at a lot, and we've like set goals and, ensure that they're attainable or smart, or that, the next, as David Allen would have you do, like set up, well, what's the very next task I need to do to get to my goals? And he paints a picture here that sometimes goals can be counterproductive. He tells the story of people climbing Everest, right? And like, they know they've crossed the limit at the time that they need to turn back, if it's going to be safe to have enough time to walk back to base camp. But they can see the top, and they decide to plow on in poor conditions without enough time. And it's like just that, and a load of them died, right? And it's like just knowing that that desire to reach your goal, it was sort of a story that laid out, well, sometimes that can have very negative effects because we sacrifice things in the process we don't necessarily realize we'd be sacrificing. And he talks about some people who take the attitude of sort of taking the next step, but without knowing what the ultimate goal is, just using the means you have to do the next thing, and being okay with not knowing where it's ultimately going.
Yes. That was the effectualism one, wasn't it? He talks
right. Okay.
So he's saying, as you say, causally minded people choose a goal and then select the resources and means to achieve it. Whereas effectually minded people look what means they have and then choose the goals.
Right.
So
yes.
Like two mindsets. He outlines there, but I think it's interesting to think like it can be quite formulaic to think like, okay, what's my goal? And then like, how do I achieve it? Instead of kind of going the other way around, going like, oh, look at my life and here's the things I've got, here's the skills I've got, here's the opportunities I have, here's the gifts I've been blessed with, here's the resource I have access to. What would be a good use of time? And I think that's quite a useful orientation, I think, especially when you've gone from sort of a very, not necessarily like mechanical, but it can often feel a bit like a checklist, being like, okay, here's my goal. Yeah. How do I achieve it? What do I need to do? What are the steps to get there? Yeah. I guess I'm just wondering what way. I think that's also a big part of like setting up, kind of, if you've got a comfortable environment or you've got the resource available to you, then you're giving yourself a better chance of kind of allowing things to emerge from that, as opposed to trying to force things to happen.
I can definitely relate to the idea that when you focus so much on your ends, you cannot realize that you're not really enjoying your means of getting there, or you're not sort of checking how much value or pleasure you're getting from the journey. You're just trying to plow through to get to the end of something. I remember someone talking about doing the 3 Peaks challenge, and where you're trying to, like, I can't remember in how many hours, I think, is it 24 hours? You're trying to climb these 3 mountains across Britain. It's like, you got like drive between them and like put your foot down to get to the next one to climb the next one. And it's like, well, maybe that would feel good at the end of it to know you've done it, but I'd much rather climb them all across, a few more days at least, taking the scenery, like have a good night's sleep, go to the pub afterwards. Like, I think I would enjoy that a lot more. And I wouldn't mind that I did it in a lot longer time than someone that could knock them all out in 24 hours.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Interesting. I guess I wanted to extend this part of the conversation to systems, daily routines, habits, habit tracking, that sort of thing. I know I've sent you a couple of items of content from the guy Chris who does the Modern Wisdom podcast. He has like a weekly newsletter, and I normally shoot across a few ideas. And something that's been quite key in some of his themes is around that there's a point in which you've done enough of like setting up your systems, setting up your routines, putting everything in place. And there's a point in which you just kind of need to just kind of get on with life and do the thing you need to do, as opposed to constantly like monitoring yourself. And also I think this comes up in another chapter around, the Buddhist guide to not thinking positively. So we can learn not to feel like doing something, but doing it anyway. So kind of how action eats, motivation
right
every time. I think, I guess just trying to kind of tie that all in together is that I've been thinking a lot recently about how, okay, so I've got my morning routines. I've kind of got the things throughout my day that are helpful to me and are conducive to me waking up in the morning, feeling healthy, strong, eating well. Well, that's like, making sure I'm not neglecting areas of my social life and friendships and relationship and that sort of thing. But I think it can get to a point, and I've noticed this in myself, where that's become the task. It's taken over, and I've become too fixated on that being my goal. As in, my goal is to do all my routines, then I'll be good to do all this. Right. Then I'll be able to do all this reading, and then I'll be able to kind of do this podcast and other areas of my life. But I'm actually finding that I'm not really doing those things as much as I'd like to, and
it becomes clearing the deck.
Yes, I'm curious whether I need to go more into sort of a maintenance phase and pull it back. So, and I guess with that in mind, kind of, do I need to sort of accept that my routines and my my second brain and capturing information is as good as it's going to be for now, until I feel like doing something about it, and just kind of crack on with the things that are meaningful, and I guess allow things to emerge and allow some uncertainty and allow a bit more flow. That's my last month's musings condensed into a couple of minutes.
Definitely relates to
wondering
that.
what your thoughts are.
Where like the getting through the to-dos and the tasks you set up as things that are maintenance become the main and sometimes only thing you get done, which then leaves out anything that's more meaningful or more fun or something else. I definitely can relate to that, and have like cleared out a lot of crap that I used to like try and make myself do every week because I just didn't want to anymore.
It's how do you find the kind of the challenge of not letting things slide, but still getting meaningful things done in a relaxed way that takes the pressure off you? I mean, that's probably the
big question.
One of the big Will and Luke discuss questions of the last couple of years. And I think we're always trying to tackle that, aren't we? But how do you sort of relax, but get the things done you want to get done at the same time?
Yeah, because you can, when like, I don't know. I think it kind of comes down to like that trust and listening to yourself. Like I know the times where, or at least sometimes I know the times where I kind of feel pretty tired. I don't really want to go and exercise after work. But actually I have felt this way before, and I do know that usually when I go and work out anyway, I do feel better for it, versus a time where no, I'm actually like exhausted or ill and actually now I don't have to do it just to tick this off my to-do list. Like I do better to look after myself, and finding like like the shade of grey between that and like knowing where to listen to yourself and when you're sort of kidding yourself versus when you're or I suppose the opposite, which is forcing yourself through things, through suffering just for the sake of like feeling a good enough person for ticking off your to-do list or your habits. It's I don't know, I don't have an answer, but it's like an ongoing felt sense, I think.
It's interesting you say that's something I've been reflecting on the past couple of weeks, like watching myself overwork. So I picked up a lot of extra shifts just to save a bit of extra money for upcoming trip and moving house and that sort of thing. So I've been doing a lot of work, and I've felt it in my body how that's affected me. And I've been still whilst trying to do that, like white knuckle it with my habits. And what's happened is they've just kind of dropped off entirely because I'm not physically in the state to kind of get up to the gym early if I'm doing like a massive double shift, or, you know, I'm not eating as well because I'm taking the shortcut option because I'm tired and things. I think it's really highlighted to me that like I need to listen to my body, you know, listen to kind of my energy levels. And I think what you're saying is correct, is like the more we have kind of an intuitive sense of that, and you know, the more we're in touch with that, we can actually listen to what our needs are in the moment, and we can kind of relinquish goals or relinquish ideas that we have to do things, because once we do them, we'll feel better about ourselves. Sometimes it simply is about, you know, doing nothing and not trying to fix anything, without coming up with these stories that you're being like lazy, or you're being not compassionate, not doing what's best by you. You're actually being like, you can cultivate more compassion for yourself the more you understand your kind of moods and what makes you tired and kind of the general flow of life. If you sort of, you're kind of able to have that, I guess, if you're in touch with that part of yourself.
Nice. Yeah. Well, the risk, I suppose, with these systems is if they've come from a place of like, of being good enough or something, then they become a measure of your self-worth, right? Well, how much you stick to these, I don't know, routines, habits, goals that you set up for yourself, which it's like that last chapter. It becomes I need to clear the deck and tick off everything so I can sort of feel safe and secure again.
I think this leads us really nicely on to the chapter on the Museum of Failure. And
Can I just jump in before that?
Yeah, please do. Yeah,
There's something I found really funny in this chapter, because I don't know if you'd come across this before, but he quotes this Yale study of goals, which I have actually read in a couple of places before, where they talk about these students. He says here in 1953, these students, they were all asked, who had written down goals for the future and who hadn't. And then they, decades later, went and spoke to these people, and the ones who had written down their goals back when they were doing their degrees, they were more successful, they were happier in marriage, they were earning more money. And then so he went to he called up Yale and wanted to find more about this study, and basically went down this rabbit hole and found that it never existed. Like there was no record that this study ever took place.
That's it.
And that essentially someone had just made it up. I just thought that was brilliant, because that's
amazing.
I've read this before, this study, and it really, like, I found it really powerful that, people who just think about their future and decide what they want, they end up having these better lives, and essentially someone just made it up.
That's amazing. I love that. The Museum of Failure, which I would absolutely love to go to. So he talks about this this museum in Chicago, which is full of products that were released but then ended by certain companies. So they might have only been around for like a month or, kind of half a year. Then there's things like, I don't know, like yogurt smelling shampoo, or like Coca-Cola tried like a weird flavor that didn't lift off and stuff. And I wish I kind of remembered more examples, but I guess he's
I remember one was gender-based nappies, so nappies that were sort of different shapes for boys and girls, and not only was it a bad idea that didn't take off because no one wanted to stock like 2 shelves worth of nappies, but also the company that made them had also made them and it had failed in the past, but no one had kept record that it was an idea that they'd already tried.
That's amazing. That's so good. I think this kind of leads on to what we're talking about around goals and things, and how kind of like sticking to your goals for too long is kind of a negative thing, or just like white knuckling them to the point where they become not meaningful anymore. You're burning yourself out, or it's just you're wasting your time. And I think in this one, he's kind of saying that, we avoid confronting failure, and we're obviously better off embracing it and, jumping ship when we kind of feel like things aren't going too well. And that was one thing he did say about goals, is like often sometimes with goals we'll stop once they're achieved and won't kind of go any further. And he gave there's a really kind of complex reason why, like in New York, when it rains, that like there's less taxis because taxi drivers they want to fulfill a certain like quota per day. And because when it rains, more people take taxis, but then once they've done enough jobs, they'll just stop for the day. So there's less taxi drivers.
So they all hit their quota faster. So they all knock off sooner, which means when it's still raining, there are just fewer taxis around at the point where more people want more taxis. Yeah,
so I'd never really thought about that. It's just quite interesting. I don't know if I've got any examples in my own life, but certainly it's sort of like you kind of set yourself an upper limit. Right. And then like you don't go beyond it because you've kind of been like, once I've done that, I'll stop, But then I know we've read books where it's kind of saying set yourself an upper limit to stop at because you don't want to lose enthusiasm. So like,
you can do something so much that you suffer through it and then it makes you not want to do it anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess there's some kind of counteracting arguments there, but I think linking to kind of what we were saying earlier, in that Museum of Failure, in that chapter, he says, we too often make our goals part of our identities and then see failure as catastrophic. So it's like an attachment we have to success.
Yeah.
And then further to that, he said, and this is a quote that I love. It's like perfectionism is a fear-driven strategy to avoid the experience of failure at all costs. And it's interesting, you talk a bit about that, this cast, that like, what's beneath this drive to kind of succeed or get things done or to finish these tasks. And it might be it's like fear driven. That's like, if I don't finish this, then I'm not worthy, or I'm not a good enough person, or I'm not meeting the expectations that myself or other people have set for me. And what he's saying is that like celebrating failures and embracing failures and allowing yourself to fail and get things wrong is like down to earth, and it makes us human, and it's more authentic, and it's more real, and it strips away the inessential parts of life. We don't kind of just carry on doing things that aren't important to us because the time might have passed. We might have already failed them, but we keep going anyway.
Small examples of this is like on the 4-hour work week, where he talks about if you're not enjoying a book, just put it down. But it can be, we can get it in our head. We must finish things that we start, right? But you learn along the way whether it might not mean what it meant to you today, what it meant yesterday.
He talks about how we gave various examples about how we avoid the facts when it doesn't meet our expectations. So if we've set a goal or we have an idea about how certain things should be, we'll often like keep going because we kind of just are looking for facts that agree with us, or like ignoring the facts or the reality of the situation that's telling us to like stop doing this, and this is not a good idea, and you should kind of jump ship now. Interesting. I like this chapter a lot. It kind of tied in a lot of what he's saying in quite a practical way, I suppose, in terms of goal setting anyway.
He talks about this idea, which I think, we've probably heard a lot, that actually the road to success is just a bunch of failures, right? You try something, you stumble, like learning how to walk is a bunch of falling over. So learning how to ride a bike is, a bunch of falling off your bike before you can do it. But he goes beyond that and says that, but that's still a justification for success. And he goes beyond that to, sometimes we just fail. Like we might not learn to ride that bike, or maybe some sort of bigger challenge we set ourselves. And he talks about the attitude of just embracing failure, even if it's not on the path to some sort of success. It's just a failure.
I like that, because I think we're often drilled that in with kind of autobiographies of successful people who kind of like hammer into us that like the reason they are where they are now is because they failed at something and then something good came from it. But also like they're not telling you the stories of stuff where they failed and just nothing came from it at all. It's a good one worth remembering. Like it's okay. Like there's so many failures we will have.
And the example he runs with is the Millennium Dome in London, which was just a massive financial failure, and not just financial, but there was like an organizational failure as well. And he was saying that once it had been completely acknowledged that it was now a failure and everything was just being sold off, then people started being like open and honest and talking about how they felt about the project along the way and talking about what went wrong. And there was sort of a shit as the place turned into this sort of jumble sale where people could just walk in and buy the stuff they were getting rid of. There was sort of this solemn togetherness of people like being authentic, whereas before they'd committed to the failure, there's this inauthentic like pushing on that no, everything, we're all smiling and everything's fine, whereas under the surface it's not that way. And so I liked that idea that embracing failure sort of it sort of can bring people together in a more authentic way than pretending it's not happening.
Yeah, there's a melancholy to life's impermanence and failures and things. Yeah, I really liked it. Yeah, it's I think that was kind of the more chatting with it you now. It's probably one of my favorite chapters actually. And it's kind of saying, let ourselves fail. It's the path to authenticity. I think it's a healthy thing to be able to kind of like laugh at your own failures or fuck ups and stuff, like,
there is something quite funny about it, and not in a harsh and cynical way, but like trying to make this like monumental building in the center of London that's this big exhibition, and it just going horribly wrong and like, hemorrhaging money.
Or just these wild short misguided decisions, or just like short-sightedness. There's like a story about how, like, I guess when I give these stories, I try and summarize them, but probably get the exact facts wrong. Right. But like, there's, France were redoing all of their like rail stations across like a section of the country or something. And then they found out after they'd spent like billions of dollars on it that like the trains didn't fit the platforms. So there's like a 2 foot, that was in another book we covered.
Yeah,
there's like
I remember that.
A 2 foot gap between every train and every platform.
Yeah,
that's like totally, and because like someone just failed to check the measurements and stuff. I guess it's like the thing I'm reflecting on is like, now that sort of thing would be funny, but I'm wondering like, how can we build a bit more of a lightness to our own failures in the moment, or maybe just not so, we'd have to wait like a year to be like, oh yeah, that was funny. Because there's stuff we like laugh about, but at the time was just harrowing. It was just like the worst thing that's ever happened. It's awful. But then it's sort of in hindsight, like, oh, that was a bit ridiculous. That's kind of funny. Yeah, I just want to shorten the gap between that and the day to day. I suppose that's a lofty goal, but certainly worth bearing in mind that's like, it's the most reality based thing to do, is kind of acknowledge it and just sort of try and find a way to not punish yourself for it, I suppose, or sort of feel bad about it. Yeah.
Ultimately not taking things too seriously.
Cool. Is there anything else you kind of that stood out to you or you wanted to speak about? That's most of my main interests, I'd say.
The last one that stands out is the chapter on security.
Yes.
Called The Safety Catch, The Hidden Benefits of Insecurity.
Yeah.
I just really enjoyed the paradoxes in it that I think the message was oftentimes in order to feel, there's a big difference between the reality of security and feeling secure. There's loads of examples. One of them was some people feel more secure when they're in control, so will choose to drive over taking a plane, whereas in reality and statistically, you're much safer in a plane than on the road in a car.
Yeah.
So we'll often make decisions which are less safe to feel more secure. And then he talked about like airport security and or like like the things that get prohibited from being taken on an airplane. Wasn't there was like a pilot who wasn't allowed his tweezers or something, and he sort of got told off for complaining about it. But I think he said he like in frustration said to the security, well, like, you're not letting me take on my tweezers, but I could just crash the bloody plane if I wanted to. Like, who's the pilot? Like, and it was. I enjoyed this sort of, I don't know, recognizing that when we might be doing things to feel better, which don't necessarily have any impact or could even make things worse.
Yeah, and he talks. I'm glad you brought this up actually, because kind of looking at my notes, there's a few things in here that I did really like. Sort of how we long for futures that we have no agency over.
Right.
So what he's suggesting is, kind of we should adopt, negative thinking but positive acting as an antidote to this. So kind of acknowledge that like we have no control over the future, but kind of act positively in this moment as we are now, rather than trying to kind of control things in the future. He does say, so the goal of security is false, and the real happiness may be dependent on being willing to face and tolerate insecurity and vulnerability. He says being vulnerable is like being without armor, being authentic, being present. If we feel our vulnerability, we are able to experience the full range of our reactions to the world around us. And I think I had an example of this when I did like a little bit of stand-up comedy like years ago for a laugh. And I remember people being like, "Oh, you can have a drink before you go on stage." And I was like, no, I want to feel like the full anxiety itself. Like I want to like be, like able to, like experience that for what it is, rather than like trying to feel secure by having a drink to feel less anxious and kind of get through it. I was like, no, I want to feel it all. There's a lot here I've written down actually, so I don't know if you've got anything else to say, otherwise I'll just keep going.
Well, it's not just that sometimes acting to feel secure can be paradoxically negative, but it's actually that you're pointing out there that vulnerability, like feeling insecure about things sometimes is life. Like he quotes Brené Brown talking about how you can't just selectively numb the emotions you don't like. If you avoid and numb away emotion, you kind of numb it all. So if you want to feel the truest depths of love, you kind of have to open yourself up to anxiety and shame and vulnerability. There's you can't really have one without the risk, at least the risk of the other.
And something I've been thinking about recently is kind of like the expectation effect. How sometimes we might build up things in the future as if to kind of try and experience them now. So I guess like I'm about to go on like a 2.5 week holiday, and I'm cautious not to kind of pump it up too much in my mind, because I think often that's what can leave you to feel like let down, as if you had this like perfect idea of like how things should be in the future. And like, it's almost like by worrying about it or by celebrating it too much in your mind, you can affect the actual experience of it at the time. As a sense, I guess, kind of like linking to kind of like trying to feel secure that like, the future is going to be great because I've done all this. But at the same time, like, the flight could be delayed, I could break a leg on holiday. Like there's all these things, and it's sort of like trying to not build up things, this perfect idea in my head of how things should be, and just sort of like going with the flow a bit more. There's one quote here that I did highlight in orange, not just blue, which means it's serious. And I think it's probably the final bit on this that I liked, is that change is the only constant, as is impermanence. We seem to fight against it. Why do we try to fight it? We try to separate ourselves from the world via security, which makes us separate from life. We build an ego to protect ourselves. We try to make ourselves isolated, and that leaves us lonely. Which is interesting. We build walls, which causes us to create an enemy. So it
really stood out to me in this, and I've probably heard these things before, but about sort of on world measures of happiness. There's like some of the poorest African countries come out on top as some of the world's happiest people. He went into a particular example going around this African slum where they got like running water or sewage systems, and people living in sort of like tarpaulin huts and things. And yet, like, it's not to dismiss the suffering that comes from that, but it's interesting that people in those conditions can be happier than, I suppose, the more built up Western countries that try to build up all this security and safety. And it's kind of like once you're at the bottom, there's nowhere else to go. So you can feel more secure in life somehow, something like that.
And he's also saying, comparison isn't the fairest assessment of your situation. It's sort of like comparing yourself to someone else's circumstances doesn't necessarily have an impact on how happy you can be in your own circumstances.
Right.
It's sort of thinking that elsewhere is more secure or more happy or better than where you are in this current moment is probably a bit short-sighted. I think, it's kind of saying that we're prone to thinking that, being somewhere else or being in a better place or in a better relationship or in a better climate or a better financial situation, those things will make us feel happy. Whereas the reality is that that's kind of us fantasizing about a sense of security that wouldn't ever be guaranteed anyway.
Yeah.
There we go, mate. I reckon that's a cast. What do you reckon?
Yeah, call it. Good stuff.
Cool. And when I say see you later, I actually mean see you later. I'm going to be seeing you in 2 weeks' time. So it's
probably
first time.
Let's not cling too much to the future. Who knows what could happen?
Yeah, true. Yeah. Well, I hope that outcome occurs, but I won't hold it too tightly. But I'll probably see you in a couple of weeks. That's the plan. So there we go. For anyone listening, it's quite a nice moment for us to be meeting up in the future. It's been 3 years since we've seen each other. So our goals of doing an in-person cast are hanging by a thread, but we'll see what happens. Yeah. Good uns. All right, mate. Chat to you soon.
Take care, mate. Nice one.
Cheers, mate. See you.
Bye.
Bye.